Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, back in April of this year, I had the privilege of being a part of a group tour that I organized to Rome and Florence. Got to go to Rome for the first time. Incredible history, going back in 2 weeks with my sister. Can't wait. And one of the things that really struck me in visiting places like the Circus Maximus and the Coliseum was how much they reminded me of going to a sporting event today. And you could see how much our modern arenas and stadiums are directly influenced by what Rome had 2,000 years ago. The restroom facilities and the food places that you could go to, and even just the design of things like the Colosseum. It was exactly like what you have today. And that includes the fact that you could go and get food, because these were all-day events sometimes. At the Coliseum, for example, you had different kinds of events. You had in the morning, you had your fights against animals, and you even had almost like a circus where they would bring in all these exotic animals for people to see. And then you would have executions, and you would have the gladiatorial combat, and this would be like an all-day thing, and there'd be breaks in there so people could get food and use the restroom and stuff. So I thought it would be interesting, with all of that in mind, to take a look at the video that Tasting History with Max Miller did on the Roman Colosseum, what it was like to attend games. This was from about a year ago, and I'm guessing he's going to focus on some of the food that they made. We have such incredibly rich sources telling us so much about what went on at these events. So this will be an interesting one. I'll put the link down in the description so you can check it out without my commentary. Let's go ahead and dive into this one. It's nice to see that I matched the apron that Max is wearing with my choice of hoodie today.
If you were to visit the Colosseum in ancient Rome, what would your day be like? Where would you get your tickets? Where would you sit? What would you actually see? And most importantly, what would you eat? It wouldn't be hot dogs and nachos, but rather something like these honeyed dates stuffed with nuts and pepper. So thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video as we spend a day at the Colosseum, this time on Tasting History.
It's like my new thing is to dance to intro music now.
Panem et circenses. Bread and circuses. That's what the poet Juvenal said that the ancient Romans really wanted, and he meant it in a disparaging way, but I gotta say, food and entertainment, that's kind of all I want too.
Yeah, really, as much as things are different, they stay the same. People want the same things, it's just the form of what that is changes over time.
And should you ever find yourself in the ancient Roman Empire, the Colosseum could provide you with both of those things. The concession stands of the Colosseum offered chickpeas, nuts, fruits, sausages, little pastries, figs, grapes, peaches, cherries, berries, walnuts, olives, and melons.
And I wonder if people complained about the prices, about how much higher they were at the Colosseum than at other places. Because, you know, they had fast food places in these cities. If you go to Pompeii, it's incredible. You can go and you can actually see walking down the street, there was right at the storefront, you can actually see the fast food places where they could go and get a hot meal just kind of on the fly as they were walking to wherever they were going. It's amazing how things were similar.
The poet Martial specifically called out a fondness for dates, such as are sold at the theaters. So I found a recipe for stuffed dates using the ancient Roman cookbook Apicius de Coquinaria. Remove the stones from dates and stuff with nuts, pine nuts, or ground pepper. Roll in salt, fry in cooked honey, and serve.
That sounds delicious.
Well, that's easy enough. Now, he calls these dulcia domestica, or homemade sweets. But in fact, most people would have probably bought these already made. Yeah. Because in ancient Rome, especially in the city, having a kitchen in your own home was really quite a luxury, so most people got most of their food at the Thermopolia, which were basically ancient fast food restaurants.
Yep.
Though if it's ancient Roman snacks that you're looking for, well, I've got you covered there. And for that, what you'll need is 15 to 20 dates. And you want a big date, like medjool dates, because they need to be big enough to get stuffed. Then 1 cup or 125 grams of walnuts.
I love walnuts.
A 1/3 cup or 45 grams of pine nuts. And you can use either or nuts, walnuts or pine nuts, but I'm going to use both because why not? and then 1 teaspoon of black pepper. And I prefer long pepper because that was one of the popular peppers in ancient Rome, and it is easy to get if you go online or an Indian grocery store. It's wonderful. It's a little bit
Don't have any Indian grocery stores anywhere around me, so I guess that's out.
different from most of the peppers that you've tried, so try some long pepper. Then 1 cup or 235 milliliters of honey and some fine sea salt for rolling the dates. So start by slicing the dates lengthwise on one side. Don't cut them all the way in half. You want to just cut them so they can hold the filling. Then grind the walnuts and pine nuts in a mortar. Now the recipe doesn't say what the texture is exactly supposed to be. You can make this into a really fine paste, like using a blender or something like that, but with a mortar and pestle it kind of is not quite as fine, and I like that because it adds to the texture. What you do want well crushed is the long pepper. The finer the better, because biting into a big old piece of pepper ain't great. Once the pepper is crushed, add in the nuts and mix all together until everything is evenly dispersed, and then take a date.
I've said this before about other things, but it always fascinates me to think about food, about some of the weird things we have today as far as food goes. They're absolutely delicious. At some point, somebody had to figure out, I'm going to try this and see what it's like, you know? Before that, no one would have done it.
Open it up and stuff in as much of that filling as you can. And you kind of want to pack it in there because otherwise it'll all fall out when it goes into the honey for cooking. Once it's filled, close up the date around it as best you can and continue this until all the dates are filled. Then take the dates one at a time and roll them in the salt. Again, fine salt is going to work best for this because you want it to stick to the outside. If you use like a kosher salt or something, it just doesn't stick. Once they're all coated, heat the honey in a saucepan. And you just want to bring it to a simmer with the foam rising in the middle, and you let it cook for about 10 minutes. And keep an eye on it because if it gets too hot, it will foam up and actually out of the pan, and you get a huge sticky mess that's just impossible to clean.
One of the things that I've learned is to start using much bigger pans than are necessary so that things don't boil over. I've learned that the hard way.
I've been there, I've done that, and I do not recommend. So you just want a little bit of foam and let it cook for 10 minutes, and then you can start adding the dates into the honey. Now they're going to open up a little bit, so make sure that the filling is on the top, otherwise the filling will all come out. And instead of rolling them around in the honey, kind of spoon the honey or push the honey up on top so it gets into the filling, but so that the filling doesn't fall out. Leave them to cook in the honey for about 45 seconds to a minute, and then take them out and set them on a plate or a piece of foil or
Dude, I might actually try this.
And then let them cool completely. It'll take about 10 minutes, which is enough time for me to tell you about the rather tedious build that is the Lego Coliseum. The nice thing is that because it's kind of tedious, I had plenty of time to let my imagination run wild and wonder what it was like to actually visit the Colosseum in ancient Rome. So you're going to the Colosseum. Lucky you. Just a few little things to cover before you head off. First of all, don't call it the Colosseum.
Flavian
Back
Amphitheater.
In ancient Rome, they called it the Amphitheatrum Flavium.
So you see the statue of Nero right here as like the sun god. That was a colossus, and that's why we call it the Colosseum, because it was built next to that statue of Nero. But yeah, it was built by the Flavian emperors, Vespasian, and then finished by Titus.
Or Flavian Amphitheater, named after the imperial dynasty that ruled during its construction.
So a little bit about these guys. We've talked about them some, but Vespasian is the one who ends up on top at the end of what we call the year of the four emperors, which was 69 AD. Pretty easy to remember that one. So you have several emperors that we go through. It ends up with Vespasian. He rules for 10 years. He starts the project of the amphitheater. Up until this point, you've got the Circus Maximus, which isn't real far away from there, and it's significantly bigger. Holds like 5 times as many people as the Colosseum. It's considered one of the largest sports arenas ever built, if not the largest, and 250, 300,000 people there, and you can still go there and see the restrooms and the food places and things like that. Really cool place to visit. But they build this amphitheater, and it's really a wonder of technology, and I highly recommend you go if you ever get the chance. But Vespasian dies before it's finished. Titus takes over. Titus is only emperor for a couple of years. He's the guy who had destroyed Jerusalem. He was a general under his father. who destroys Jerusalem in that siege that destroys the temple and all that stuff. And then his brother Domitian. Domitian was not a good guy. And it's under Domitian that you have the first real significant persecution of Christians. I mean, yeah, there was a little bit of a persecution under Nero, but it wasn't widespread like it was under Domitian.
The Colosseum likely refers to a statue, the Colossus Neronis, which was a massive statue of the Emperor Nero that stood near the amphitheater. Though at some point, after Nero was no longer popular, the Romans reskinned it so it would be Sol, the sun god. But as long as you see a colossal statue next to an amphitheater, you're in the right place. Now, the second thing before you head off is that you need to make sure you got a ticket. Good news is they're free. Bad news is you're probably not going to get one. See, even though the Colosseum could hold around 50,000 spectators, some say it's actually closer to 70,000, the city had a population of nearly 1 million, and so not everyone was going to get a ticket.
At this time, the largest city on earth, and you're talking about 1 in 20 of the Roman inhabitants could even get one, and everybody wanted to get one. And you had different kinds of seating, just like you do today. You had the really good seating, especially around the emperor, and then you had the nosebleed section, which really isn't that bad if you go there. I mean, it's good seats wherever you are.
Now, some years there were lots and lots of games, so your chances were higher. Like in the year 107, to celebrate his victory over the Dacians, the Emperor Trajan held games for 123 consecutive days, with over 11,000 beasts and 10,000 gladiators entertaining the crowds.
And Trajan, who has that famous Trajan's column, his column, which is down there at the Forum, was celebrating the victory over the Dacians. And this is typically when you would have these games, is when there was something to celebrate. There was something really big for the empire that had happened. You didn't just have them just because, unless you were trying to distract people from something.
But most years, they were only holding games on a handful of days throughout the entire year, usually around religious festivals like Saturnalia. But let's assume that they are holding games. How do you get a ticket? Well, just like going to the Super Bowl today, you need to know someone. See, while the tickets were free, they handed them out in big blocks to either guilds or very prominent people within the city.
And if you want to see, I mean, it's hardly a perfect portrayal, but if you at least want to get a little bit of a sense of what it was like around these games at the Flavian Amphitheater, watch the series that came out recently. I think it's called We Who Are About to Die, or Those Who Are About to Die. Stars Anthony Hopkins as Vespasian, and it shows you how they had the different teams that competed and all those sorts of things, and it gives you a little bit of a glimpse, however flawed it might be, into that culture and the scene at the amphitheater.
So maybe you're good friends with the head of the Praetorian Guard, not that Praetorian Guard, but the ones that guarded the emperor, and he could give you a ticket. Or, like me, you could be a miller, and one of the members of the Guild of Millers.
The Guild of Millers uses only the finest grains, true Roman bread for true Romans.
If neither of those avenues work, then they do have...
That's one of my favorite parts of the HBO Rome series, is the advertising that took place in those announcements of news.
Have scalpers, so you could buy a ticket. It would just be a lot more expensive than you'd probably want to pay, seeing as they're free in the first place. But let's assume you finally get yourself a ticket. The tickets, called tesserae, were often lead tokens or shards of pottery with information etched on them. And the information that would be etched on these little pieces of lead or clay would be similar to what you'd find on a ticket today.
Where you've
got the entrance gate number that you go...
Look at that. How cool is that? That you actually have all that stuff written on there. And I mean, like I said, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And those look like Greek letters. Like the one on the bottom left, you've got... you can definitely see that those are Greek letters. I mean, I think they all are. The one on the top right is as well.
Go through your level or section number and then a row number. And knowing exactly what these are, where you would be, is important to know what you're going to bring with you. Basically, if you're not a senator or the emperor, you're going to want to bring a seat cushion with you because all of the benches are either marble or wood, and that's just not comfortable. Luckily, outside the Colosseum, there are stalls set up with vendors selling cushions called tomentum circense, or circus stuffing. This was basically just chopped up reeds that were stuffed in, so probably not super comfortable, but more comfortable than marble.
And like I said earlier, you're going to be there a good bit of the day watching these games. And so, yeah, you want to have somewhat of a comfortable seat.
If you're shopping, you could also pick up some tchotchkes, like statues of gladiators, or if you could afford it, a vial of gladiator blood or sweat, the sweat being a popular addition to cosmetics. And you'd also want to get yourself some snacks. Most of the vendors outside sold sausages or pastries or little sweets like the ones that we're making today, and you could get things inside as well, but I'm guessing, just like today, the prices were always inflated inside.
100%.
So you got your cushion, you got your tchotchkes, and you got your snacks. Now you gotta find your entrance, and there were 80 of them, so it might take a while. 2 gates were reserved for the imperial family and others of very high rank. And
when you go there, you visit the Coliseum, they'll take you right to that gate and they'll show you this is where the emperor came in, this is where he sat. I mean, they know so much about what went on there.
Another 2 were used by gladiators. These were the Porta Triumphalis, or Door of Victory, and the Porta Libitinaria, or Door of Death.
Oh, death. Libitinaria is death.
You would use one of the other 76 entrances. Then once you're in, you just have to find your section, which was all delineated by class. The lowest section, closest to the action, was called the podium, and this is where you would sit if you were a senator or a priest or a Vestal Virgin. These were like the private boxes at a football game, and I'm assuming where Taylor Swiftess would sit. Then at the center one of the long sides of the Colosseum, like the 50-yard line, sat the emperor, along with his family and guests. Now the great thing about this section, the podium, is not only were you closer to the action, but also you didn't have to sit on benches.
Right.
The senatorial class and the imperial family were wealthy enough that they just brought in their own plush cushioned chairs, like carting in a lazy boy to the show. Sadly for us, we're probably not part of the senatorial class, and so all we've got is our little seat cushion stuffed with reeds. Now, if you're not a senator, but you are part of the equestrian class, well, then you would be fortunate enough to sit in the second tier, the Menianum Primum. These seats would have been made of marble, and there would be a big wall behind you separating you from the rabble in the upper levels. But let's face it, most of us would be the rabble in the upper levels. There was the Menianum Secundum Imum, and this is where the plebeian males of Rome would sit. Then the Menianum Secundum Summum, which is where non-citizens, the very poor, and the slaves would sit. Both of these sections were probably a lot less roomy than the lower sections, and they would have less...
I love that you got people like heating up their food in the seats. You've got graffiti. Romans love graffiti. I mean, it was a big deal to be able to do the graffiti.
Vendors going up and down the aisles selling wine and different snacks. Luckily,
beer guy. Oh yeah. Does it all sound familiar? Does it all seem exactly what like the experience is today? Really, have we changed all that much in 2,000 years?
We brought our own. Now there is one more section at the very, very top, a 15-story hike up to the pinnacle of the Colosseum. This was the Mesianum Summum in Legnis, and this section was reserved for women. Not only did you have to climb 15 stories, but then they usually didn't have enough seats, so a lot of the women had to stand the entire time, and you couldn't really see or hear what was going on in the arena. But on the plus side, you were the first person to get shade. See, one of the biggest dangers about seeing something at the Colosseum was not a rogue wild animal or somebody throwing a javelin into the audience. No, it was sunstroke. That is why the velarium was so important. This was a huge canopy or awning that could be stretched out across the top of the Colosseum, giving shade to those below.
And to me, that's one of the most remarkable things about the Colosseum. I mean, it was built really fast, considering how big it is and considering the technology they had. And that's because they had a lot of crews working on it. They poured a lot of money into this thing. But the fact that they had that canopy and they had that ability to give shade while people were there all day in Rome, which can be a really hot place, is remarkable to me.
But as it didn't come all the way to the center, many of the people closest to the center didn't get the benefit of the shade during certain parts of the day. So the wealthiest people wouldn't actually get the shade. So if you are in the best seats, hopefully you brought your umbraculum. These were parasols used for a little personal shade. Now, while sitting down in those lower sections was great because you could be closer to the emperor, sometimes it was not so great because you could be closer to the emperor. And depending on the emperor, that might not be a good thing. Best case scenario, he might mock you for eating at the games. The Emperor Augustus, while watching the games at the Circus Maximus, just down the way from the future Coliseum, once saw a military man that he knew eating during the games, and then, quite rudely, he said to the man, "If I want to dine, I go home." To which the man eating sent a cheeky response, saying, "Yes, but you are not afraid of losing your seat."
Exactly.
I guess Augustus was an emperor.
That's a great point. And the Circus Maximus is in a great location, too, and you have... I believe it was Augustus who eventually built a huge palace on the hill right above the Circus Maximus. You could probably, I haven't been up to that site yet, but just judging from what you could see there, I'm guessing you could see into the Circus Maximus from that palace. It's like just a perfect location.
That you could give some lip without a lot of repercussions.
In fact, I want to take a look at that. I think that'd be fun to take a look at that site. All right, so here's Rome. Let's go ahead and zoom in. There's the Colosseum right there. Let's go ahead and go to a satellite view of this because you've got this whole section here that's got all of the kind of ancient Rome, and it's still basically you can go in and view it all. And when we stayed there, we stayed at a hotel that was over here on Via Cavour, which is real close to the Colosseum. But let's go to zoom in just a little bit here, and you can see there's the Colosseum and all the different levels you can see of it. And we're going to go down this way a little bit. You can see all of the Forum and everything. And I believe that there's the Circus Maximus, so it's real close right there, and you can still see the outline of all of that. Now, if I go ahead and go take a look at a view from down in the Circus Maximus, you're going to be able to see right where the palace was. Take a look at that. Look, you still got... I mean, it's so cool. You can walk down there and just stand in it. And right here is the palace, right above the Circus Maximus. And this would have, of course, all been seating. You've still got that center area there where they had all the monuments and different things going on. But look at that massive palace complex up there. Really, really cool.
That was not the case with the Emperor Domitian. Now, I did a video on Domitian and his cruelty during a specific banquet, the Black Banquet, but it seems that he was even worse at the Colosseum. One day while watching a bout between two gladiators at the Colosseum, a man was overheard saying that a Thracian gladiator might be a match for the Murmillo, but not for the patron of the games. Basically, he was implying that the emperor had kind of set things up to favor the gladiators that he liked. And Domitian, never one to overreact, had the man dragged from his seat and, with a placard around his neck reading "A Thracian supporter who spoke evil of his emperor," he was thrown into the arena and torn to pieces by dogs. So if after a few glasses of wine you get a little loose in the lips, maybe it's best that you're not sitting down by the emperor. Though, no matter where you sit, everybody in the arena gets the same show. The day would open with the Pompa, which was a parade around the arena. There were trumpeters, water organists, and drummers leading a procession of animals like elephants, horses, and oxen.
People don't realize that the Colosseum was not just about gladiators. There were so many other things, and a big part of it was coming to see these exotic animals. And sometimes you get to see those animals fight humans, fight each other, but sometimes it was just to show them off, and it was a great way to for PR to say, look, we conquered this territory, and look what we brought back. There's some incredible stuff.
Then acrobats and dancers, statues of the gods would be carried in on litters, nobles and soldiers in chariots, and finally the editor, or person in charge of arranging the games, along with his entourage, and of course the gladiators, who later in the day would fight for the enjoyment of the audience. Following the Pompa was the Venationes, or hunt of the wild beasts. Bears, elephants, giraffes, crocodiles, wild dogs, lions, and other big cats would be let into the arena.
And they would create scenarios like you see here. You see the hills and the trees. I mean, they would bring this stuff in. This was theater at its best. If you've ever been to a Broadway show and you've been like blown away by how they can use these sets to really immerse you, they did the same kind of thing in the Colosseum. They created these scenarios that really got people invested. That's how you could get people coming, and you had 100 days of games. You could have 100 different days that had completely different things and keep people interested and keep people entertained.
would do tricks or were parts of skits that had scenery and costumes, and people would come out and interact with the animals. It was a whole big thing. And then often they were part of the hunt, and this would be where people went in and hunted the animals, sometimes ending in the animal's demise and sometimes that of the hunter. After this, it was time for the halftime show, the Meridiani, though instead of today a pop singer coming out and singing all of their greatest hits, it was a time for public executions.
Yep.
Very often this meant damnatio ad bestias, or condemnation to beasts, where criminals, prisoners of war, or other people who just annoyed the emperor were put to death by wild animal. Sometimes it was not the wild animals doing the killing, but other condemned persons, forced to fight each other for the enjoyment of the audience. Seneca wrote about this barbaric practice, saying that they had to fight each other with weapons but weren't given helmets or armor of any kind. The spectators insist that each, on killing his man, shall be thrown against another to be killed in his turn, and the eventual victor is reserved by them for some other form of butchery.
And listen, we had public executions up right until the last few decades, and in some places they still have public executions in the world today. So this is not an unusual thing.
The only exit for the contestants is death. Fire and steel keep the slaughter going, and all this happens while the arena is virtually empty.
Yeah, because people leave to go get their food during the halftime show.
He says that the arena was virtually empty because most of the audience took this time to go get lunch or use the facilities or book some time with one of the many, many prostitutes working in the lower levels of the Coliseum. But they all came back following the executions because it was time for the most anticipated portion of the day. In fact, many people didn't even come to the show until this portion of the games.
Again, doesn't it sound exactly like today? I don't really care about the opening act. I'm there for the main event.
It was called the Munera and typically involved several dozen pairs of gladiators fighting, sometimes to the death, but especially if they were good and popular with the crowd, not to the death. So I've done an entire video on gladiators, so I won't rehash too much, but I will make sure that that is the video that pops up after this. But suffice it to say, in ancient Rome, gladiators were held in high esteem.
Yeah.
They were the celebrities and the top athletes of the day. Now, as the games were, among other things, a way for the emperor to curry favor with his people, there were always some little surprise gifts during the games. Sometimes it was perfume that was sprayed out over the entire audience using a system of sparciones. It was
like throwing t-shirts and doing giveaways and, you know, having little raffles and things like that.
Like modern day misters, but instead of just water, it was perfumed water, sometimes with saffron or balsam. And sometimes it would rain not water, but prizes. These were called sparsio missilium, and they were little wooden balls shot into the audience, t-shirt cannon style. The balls were vouchers inscribed with prizes to be collected from the sponsor of the games. Cassius Dio said that the Emperor Titus gave out little wooden balls variously inscribed, one designating some article of food, another clothing, another a silver vessel, or perhaps a gold one, or again horses, pack animals, cattle, or slaves.
Could you imagine? I went to go see the Colosseum, the games at the Colosseum, and I won a slave. It was amazing. What a day. Wow, I mean, but that was part of their culture. It was part of what they did.
For instance, the recipient even got an entire apartment in the city. But should you get a hold of one of these balls, you wanted to get out of the Colosseum as quick as possible. Because some of these prizes have already been torn to pieces in the hands of those who try to snatch them. The most sensible man, therefore, runs from the theater as soon as he sees the little gifts being brought in, for he knows that one pays a high price for small favors. Basically, it was safer for you to get out of the Colosseum altogether before the prizes even start getting shot into the audience. Now, maybe not as flashy as an entire apartment, another thing that might be shot into the audience, raining down, was food. Biscuits and melting pastries, Amerian fruit not overripe, musk cakes and bursting dates from invisible palms were showering down. And now everyone, be he rich or poor, boasts himself the emperor's dinner guest.
That's amazing. I love so much all these rich sources we have of people describing little things like that, and that it made it all the way down through history. That's why we know so much about the Roman Empire.
It's raining down from the sky, bursting dates, perhaps like the ones I'm about to eat right now. And here we are, honeyed
really
dates
good.
stuffed with nuts and pepper. So you've got to let them cool because at first they are just super, super sticky. They're still sticky once they're cooled, but not as sticky. Like, it's actually not that bad, especially if they're raining down on you. Oh, what a mess. Here we go. That's really good.
Yeah.
That's really, really good.
I feel like
the
it would be.
most surprising and pleasant flavors in here are simply the salt and pepper.
Right.
Because it's a lot of sweet. Between the dates and the honey, you get a lot of sweet. Also, you want the texture of those nuts. Don't grind them up into a fine paste. Have a little texture. But to counteract the sweet,
Yeah.
that pepper and
Makes sense.
salt, I think it's really, really important. They're not over peppery. There's a little heat from it. They're not overly salty. It's a perfect match. They are really, really good. So these are way simple to make. They're easy to find all the ingredients. So give it a shot. It's definitely worth it. And I will see you next time on Tasting History.
All right, that was really good. I enjoyed that one a lot, not only because of all the things we've already talked about, but just because it just seems like a really, really good food to eat. I'm excited to be heading back to Italy in a couple of weeks. I am going to be making some videos. I made some videos my first time in Italy that I haven't uploaded yet to over on VTH Extra, but there's a couple of extra shots I need to get for some of those videos to complete them. So thankfully I'm going back to be able to do that. But if there's anything in particular you'd like to see me highlight from my time in Rome while I'm there with my sister, let me know in the comment section below. If there's other videos from Tasting History you think I should check out, let me know that as well. And please do go over and check out Tasting History. I think he does a fantastic job of connecting us to food in history and telling us how important that was to history. It's a great lens through which to view history. Thanks for watching.